Bird Box is the latest Netflix original movie dealing with supernatural forces and sensory deprivation, kind of like A Quiet Place, but instead of relying on sound, this movie focuses mainly on visuals. So for us to get a better understanding of Bird Box, we have to look at the entirety of the creatures, the story, the themes that the movie tries to encompass, and with that we can get an overall better understanding of the creatures, the story, and the whole theme and why Bird Box works. So for us to begin, we have to start off with the creatures. Now, the creatures really aren't expanded upon in the movie, and our main point of reference is Charlie, who actually gives us a somewhat detailed view of what these creatures are. Now, unlike A Quiet Place, which is a movie about aliens who come to Earth and they have heightened acute hearing, this is why they're predators and they seek to destroy us, the creatures of Bird Box are more mythological and spiritual in the sense that these creatures are called endgame creatures, and Charlie gives us a deep understanding of what they are. These creatures are demons or spirit creatures, not aliens. They're entities that take the form of your worst fears, or your deepest sadness, or your greatest loss. And we see that throughout the movie at various points, but we're going to go deeper into just what kind of various forms these demons take before we go ahead and give examples of the movie of what kind of creatures and when they take their form. So the various forms come from across all ancient mythologies and religions. You have the Akamana, you have the Varios Davis from ancient Zoroastrian legend, you have the Surgate from the ancient Christian occult beliefs, which made pregnant women see their unborn children as monsters, lobsters, or spiders, which has a deeper meaning in this movie if you think about it, because Mallory at this point is pregnant, and we know from the very beginning of the movie that she doesn't really want the child. So that actually hits closer to home to the characters and might be the fear that Mallory suffers from. And then we have the Hule Jin from China. We have the Puka from Celtic religion. All of them are different names, different religions, different backgrounds, but they're essentially the same thing, and they mean the same thing, which is the end of humanity. Now, throughout the movie, you see that various people see different things when they see these creatures. For example, Mallory's sister, Jessica, when she's driving and she sees the creature, she says, "What is that?" It's actually a monster that she sees, and that causes her to become suicidal and kill herself. We also see Lydia, who is Douglas's wife. When she sees the creature, she sees her mother and she walks into the car committing suicide. And that is pretty much prevalent throughout the movie. Everyone sees different things. Even at the end of the movie, while Mallory doesn't see these creatures, she hears Tom's voice. And Tom and his death is Mallory's deepest sadness and her greatest loss in the movie, because Tom is the one who had her open up from her closed off world. So now that we understand the basic premise of these creatures, Gary comes into the house and Gary pulls out his drawing pad and he starts laying out different sketches. These are all various forms that the creatures can take, and we actually get visuals of just who and what these creatures are, and each of them are different in their own way depending on how you see them or what religion they come from ancient times. So these are demon creatures, and they have various forms that actually attack the human mind and give you your greatest fear, regrets, and loss. So the movie actually gives us a visual of what these creatures look like, as well as some backstory to it. So we actually do have an understanding of what these creatures are. So we have a basic premise of the creatures' looks and the way they function, because if you see them, you will die. So they never actually show us as characters what they look like, but Gary, who sees the creatures and isn't affected by them the way that everyone else is, and that's another thing that is a prevalent factor in the movie. The fact that certain individuals can see the creatures and not kill themselves, it lends us to ask, what makes them immune? What makes them different to the people who see the creatures and die? And that's because Gary actually gave us a better understanding. Gary tells us about the people who escaped a mental institution, the people who are crazy or have some sort of psychological issue. So when they see these creatures, they don't see their greatest fear, because they live with their greatest fear every day. When you're having psychological problems, or you're having some sort of meltdown or some sort of psychosis, some of the things that you always envision are your greatest fears. So you live with that every day. So when these people see the creatures, it doesn't drive them insane. It actually gives them a ray of hope into something, into making them realize probably that they're not crazy. This is what it always was, and they were right all along. So that's why Gary and other people can see the creatures, and they're forcing other people to see the creatures as well, because they want you to see what they're seeing. To them, it's the divine truth that they've always known. However, if you're not having psychological problems and you're not crazy per se, when you see the creatures, they drive you insane, because you have to come to the realization that these creatures exist. Your greatest loss exists. And a lot of people can't handle their greatest loss, their deepest sadness, or their worst fears coming to life, as opposed to people who are quote unquote crazy, who live with that every day and they finally have validation. So that's why certain characters are immune to it because they live that every day. So these creatures giving them the greatest fear doesn't actually affect them in the way that someone who doesn't live with their greatest fear in psychosis every day would be affected. So overall, you need to be able to face your fears in order for you to see these creatures and survive. And a lot of us can't face our fears. And that's when the character of Mallory comes in and her journey throughout the movie. Because the movie begins with Mallory actually as a painter who lives in a world of isolation and away from her family, her mother, her sister, even the father of her child isn't in her life, and she doesn't even want her child. So Mallory starts off actually looking down as she's painting, which is great symbolism as to what the movie is going to go through and what Mallory herself specifically is going to evolve into as the movie goes on. Because Mallory's occupation, her life's work is painting, and for painting you need to be able to see and paint or draw your pictures that you need eyesight, and Mallory's greatest asset will become something she has to live without throughout the movie. So as the movie progresses and more people come in and out of Mallory's life, as she learns to accept and love individuals such as Tom, girl and boy, she also is the best equipped to live in this type of life because she grew up, or she lived her life without close emotional attachments, and she didn't have all that around her. So she is able to cut people off, and she's able to move on when certain characters die. Even when her sister dies, Mallory's able to keep moving forward. Even when Olympia dies, she's able to take Olympia's daughter and keep moving forward. It isn't until after Tom dies when the monsters really come after her, and her greatest fear is, her greatest loss and regret is the passing of Tom. So as she's going through the forest to the sanctuary, Tom's voice is what's calling her to remove the blindfolds, and Mallory stops quite a few times, tempted by this offer to see if Tom has actually survived this. And because the creatures prey on your greatest fear, loss, or sadness, and for Mallory, she never had any of that until Tom came along and until the kids came along. So the movie itself ends up being an allegory or a metaphor about facing your fears. People aren't accustomed to facing their fears head on. And facing your fears are the most daunting task you can ask an individual. And some people would rather die than actually face their fears. So when these people actually see it, they kill themselves. And that's the overall thematic theme of the movie. And as we see through the movie, the only people who are truly immune by this are the blind, because the blind can't see these creatures. Because we know this, that even though the creatures walk among you, they can't physically harm you for some reason. Because again, the creatures aren't physically there. They're actually spirit creatures. So they can't physically interact with any humans. That's why when they're chasing you, they never touch you, they never put their hands on you. You have to see them and take your life, or one of their followers or the people who see them are the ones who actually kill you or force you to see them and kill yourself. Because the creatures themselves are apparitions, they're non-corporeal, they're more spiritual ghosts in a sense, and they cannot physically interact with you, but they can psychologically torture you, they can speak to you, they can do all sorts of things to manipulate you and make you want to kill yourself or join them and become one of their followers, such as the people who see the creatures and don't die or immediately kill themselves. And that's why the changing of your eyes, once you see the creatures, your eyes change. And if you notice, the people who actually see the demons and live, and the people who actually see these creatures and kill themselves, their eyes change in different ways. If you see the way Gary's eye or Fishfinger's eyes actually changed and the color of their irises, it's different from when someone decides to kill themselves and how their eyes darken a bit and then they do the suicidal thing. The people who are quote unquote crazy, their eyes kind of brighten up and lighten up at the sight of the creatures. And the people who are not crazy, their eyes kind of darken and get black at the sight of these creatures. So it goes along with what I was saying earlier. The people who living with these psychoses, these crazy people, when their fears are validated and they know everything they've been feeling and seeing these past few years are true, it gives them a real hope that they are not crazy, they were right all along. So their eyes brighten up, they widen, and they get more clear because they feel as though they're clear. But other people who have not or are not used to facing their fears, their eyes darkening up, their eyes get black, and they end up killing themselves. And that is the main difference between those two people: the color of their eyes, their beliefs, their psychoses, and the creatures themselves being demonic or ancient religious mythological creatures themselves are creatures that prey on our subconscious, as opposed to being monsters or aliens from other planets who came solely to kill us. So it's essentially kind of an end of times. And that's why at the end of the movie, when they find Rick and they see his compound, it gives us some sort of hope, because the creatures are the end of man, right? However, they can't physically kill you unless you see them, and the blind are perfect to thrive in this society. But not just the blind, but animals as well don't seem to suffer from this, because we see the birds in the movie, and the birds play a nice significant role in it as warning devices for these creatures, so they know these creatures are coming, because animals usually have an instinct for natural disasters and things of that nature. Like birds, animals usually run in opposite directions of natural phenomenon, and this is a sort of a metaphysical phenomenon when these creatures come out, because they are not, like I said, they're not aliens, they're actual spiritual demons. So they are kind of like an end of time warning for the animals, but they can survive because they're not affected, and that's because the sentience levels of animals are not as high and acute as human beings. So that's why the birds play a huge part, and that's why in the sanctuary they use the birds to protect the people who can see, because the blind themselves aren't privy to seeing their worst fears, because the blind don't see anything at all. And at the end of the movie ends opposite to how it began, because the movie begins with Mallory looking down and painting, and the movie ends with Mallory looking up at hope and light. So it shows you the evolution of her character, and she grows to love these two human beings, boy and girl, who she names. It shows her character journey of not just facing her fears, which is losing Tom, as well as having a child or children that she has to take care of. She faces those fears and she survives, even without having to see these demons. Mallory actually faces her fears and survives the whole ordeal. Anyway, guys, that is the ending explained for this video. That is the creatures explained. I hope I gave you guys a better understanding of these creatures and what they do and how they work. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to answer them, and hopefully you get some sort of insight on the character of Mallory as the movie progressed. Anyway, guys, if you liked the video, definitely hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you guys haven't already, and until next time, binge on.